abuts an R1 designation? And if it does, is it still the same inflection point slope setback, or is it different if it's, so if we have a plan designation of R1 adjacent rather than the SFO, does that change the inflection point or the
No.
height? Okay, so it's the same. Okay.
It's kind of this.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the row houses are kind of the transition.
Yes.
You know, they're using that as the transition.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that.
And within the district, I believe that the only places that R1 abuts the row house overlay zone, it's in the rear interior.
Okay.
And on Portland Street, that also includes an alley. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And there's also one that's down behind Southtown.
Okay.
Robin, were you going to jump in?
I'm good.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry for the...
And this is a study that Robin did to look at the height and the slope setback and to look at the kind of construction type that would be used for these kinds of dwellings and to look at where that inflection point, would be occurring given the, that you would need a stem wall. And then this also includes an allowed intrusion, which is a dormer. So this might be something that you would see in the row house overlay zone.
So
Go ahead.
just while we've got them, I'd like to sort of understand the diagrams. Is the 9 feet, like in the first and second floor, is that from the floor to the ceiling, or is that from the, say, ceiling of the first floor to ceiling of the second floor?
No, it's floor to ceiling.
Okay. And then how much do you have for the foundation lift there? Because there was one place in here where you talk about you can elevate the floor area, and does that fit within the model?
Yeah, it's about 18 inches, and the idea would be to have a crawl space. Like if you're going to have a crawl space that you can actually crawl in.
Like some of the examples, like the ones we always use as the model here is on 17th and Olive, those actually sit up about 4 feet off. That
Right.
first floor plate does.
This is sort of the minimum. We were just looking at the minimum necessary to get.
Right.
And in this district, some people have also said, well, you wouldn't even need that extra 18 inches because you could dig down for that.
Apparently, they don't know where water is.
Yeah, in this district, I don't think that would be such a good idea,
No.
given the high water table. So,
But you've still got the overall heights that are limiting it
Yeah.
regardless.
yeah, correct.
I was just curious if you wanted to go up to a 3-foot or a 4-foot crawl space area, to raise that up to get you a little bit above the walking area, sort of like that 17th and Olive one.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still fit within the height requirements?
It would probably limit those upper floors then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the row house overlay follows the existing R1 height requirements, which is 30 feet and then 37 feet with a roof slope of 8 and 12. So it's a little bit steeper roof slope because existing R1 is 6 and 12. 6 and 10. What is it?
12.
6 and 12. 6 and 12. Okay. And next we'll look at the courtyard. And the courtyard, usually the entrances face onto the courtyard, and that will be a requirement of our type as well. The one thing that we will require is that at least 20 feet of the shared courtyard be directly abutting the sidewalk and the street. It will not, an interior courtyard will not count towards a courtyard development type.
One more time with that, please.
This will not be an interior courtyard. It will be a courtyard where the shared space has to abut for at least 20 feet along.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It has to be a U-shaped building, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
The courtyard.
Or it can be two parallel buildings. But the courtyard, and that's in our code right now, and so that's keeping with that pattern. And that's a way to look at it differing from cottage cluster, for instance. So this might be a site layout. This is assuming an alley access for the parking. If the alley is developed, it will be required that access be taken from the alley for parking and/or garages.
Will parkings have to be improved at that point then?
Pardon?
Will alleys have to be improved if they're unimproved?
That's the idea.
So there have to be hardscape surface, developer would be responsible to build the alley to the nearest street?
Robin?
Good question.
Yeah, we're still
Okay.
looking at that.
I think that's
That's why
the,
he's taking
it's
notes.
the current requirement, right?
We don't have alley development.
There are some alleys
We'll follow
now
up
that
on
are
that.
completely
Yeah, okay.
not utilized in the district.
That's what I
why.
mean. So
Yeah,
if
they're
they have
just
to be
grass.
developed, if I want to build in the first person to build in the middle of the area, do I have to pay the hundreds of thousands of dollars to put that alley in?
It's usually whether you talk to the fire department or one of the other
Right.
departments, so.
Well, I assume we're going to ask fire since they tend
have
to
to look at
rule.
it.
Yep.
This is looking at a lot that's similar to the row house lot, and it's 12.5 dwelling units an acre. And this extrudes that plan and places it within the existing neighborhood. And this also takes the inflection point at 25 feet and shows a slope setback.
Which again is the same as what's in the current R1.
Right, right.
Commissioner Mills.
Just making sure I understand, I'm seeing 5 units here.
Yeah. So it's a little bit bigger unit in the back. And then both,
And I'm just, for clarity,
You can see how
also,
they're
I'm
divided.
seeing 6 spaces for 6 vehicles. And that's, I guess that's probably current code.
well, we were looking at a little bit higher density where that back unit would probably have been divided. So it would have been 6, it would have been 6 units, but this is
One space
an
per
attempt to bring it down, yeah, and gives a guest parking.
So these actually would be fairly sizable units then.
Yeah, these look like bigger units.
Because if they're 4,600 feet ground, they're 2 stories, that's
Yeah, if you were to
92,
make
so-
them, yeah. I mean, I
You're
think the
pushing-
footprints of these were about 800 square feet for the divided unit. Because they face onto the courtyard, there will be end unit standards, and that's for any unit that doesn't have a street-facing entry. And so you would have to, this is another menu, utilizing the menu idea again, that the facade could not exceed 40% of the lot coverage. Windows would need to cover 15% of the facade. There could be 1 architectural projection at a minimum, and the landscaping would have to meet L1 standards. You would need to choose 2 off of this list.
So this is a corner lot?
This is just the end unit, so as you can see from this, the entries actually face into the interior court
Okay.
because that's part of what makes courtyards.
So it would be the
tight.
street-facing portion of those units?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just to keep them within the neighborhood pattern and a walkable pattern. And then this is the height study that goes with that type. So the intent is that they would, that they could be 2 stories easily, but not more. And this height diagram actually would apply to all SFO development types with the exception of row house and cottage cluster.
And would the intent on this house type is that each unit sits on a separate lot for sale purposes?
Yeah, so we've looked a lot about how to do lot division because the intent is that people will own, or at least have the option that a developer could develop these lots and then sell them off to individual owners. And we felt that was important rather than having them be developments where they were just would have to be rentals.
I think a requirement would be some type of maintenance and access agreement within the code.
for some of those common areas and the common access.
How it's taken
Yeah.
care of, how I get to my unit from wherever the public street is.
The parking area.
Because I'm not allowed just to
Yeah.
walk across somebody else's lot unless
Yeah.
there's an agreement for that. Or you make the houses on postage stamp lots and the rest of it becomes common area with access to all owners
Which
in
is
the common
similar to
area.
the way we've done the cluster subdivisions, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think something like that just formalizes that need in code.
Right. I mean, the cluster subdivision has, if you look at the way the lots are divided, they can go from just the footprint of the individual dwelling up to, kind of sizably, completely dividing the property and then having overlying easements. And this is another courtyard concept, and this was sort of inspired by some of the studies that Portland did when they did their competition. And this looks at having flex space. And what that is that interior courtyard space is actually a flexible space that could be used for vehicles. It's can be, but not parking. But just vehicle pull-in, and then it also counts as their open multi-use space. And it was felt that up to 70% is a good percentage, that you still need some open space that doesn't have access to cars. And this would have special paving requirements with grasscrete and pavers. It also, as you can see, pushes the density up a little bit. For where we were considering having this type, it would only be within the row house, zone as proposed.
What you're saying is those 6 cars get there by coming up through the middle?
Yeah,
They're not allowed to park in the middle,
Right.
correct? They can
Right.
only access
An
through the
access
middle?
driveway of some kind, yeah.
And that's considered also open space?
yes.
So everybody who kids
kind
or
of a
something there, they gotta
multi-use
constantly
space.
be moving when cars are coming in and out.
And
There's
that
some of
would,
that here in town already in a couple of places.
yeah, Gressa Taylor has a development over by on Lawrence Street,
Jefferson.
Jefferson.
I can think of 2 or 3 places that I've seen that have this kind of feel to them where
But the
the
paper,
open spaces,
There's
some of
one-
it looks pretty good, some of it doesn't.
You would,
Those units
Oakway
have
and
more than-
Westwood is doing that right now, too.
One car, they have to park on the street?
Right.
the idea would be that this would be some sort of green paver type
Yeah,
drive area, correct?
Right.
permeable and possibly grass.
Yeah, I was pushing for all grasscrete,
Yeah,
but
grasscrete,
for the fire trucks, you do need to have some actual
Yeah.
so it might kind of look like a drive where you have pavers as strips for access for emergency vehicles. But this is definitely a little bit higher intensity use. So this is a good example of that. And so this extrudes that model. They actually have some of their primary entries on pedestrian access ways, as you can see, that run along the setback area. And that was actually suggested by some of our internal vetters who have looked at some of these types where they felt that they weren't really that popular and they didn't sell that well. And I think one example was at the farm, a part of that development. So.
One of the reasons why that had trouble.
Yeah.
That wasn't the main one.
But people really actually wanted some kind of, pedestrian access that wasn't just necessarily through a shared space. The last type we'll look at is cottage cluster, and that definitely had the most research sources. They're groupings of 2 to 12 cottages that surround an open space, and really of all the types, they need their size and mass and height sort of modulated the most to kind of read as their type. There was a trend after these were introduced to, that had them go up and up in size, up to about 1,200 square feet. And that was just felt like they suddenly didn't read as a cottage type. And they were more like a single-family detached dwelling just on a small lot. So all these will be the, the smallest dwellings that we'll look at. And we're proposing 1,000 square feet, but if you have more than 3 units in a development, that you vary the size so that you have down to an 800 square foot unit at least. And so these would be 1 to 1.5 stories. And this is a possible site configuration. The dwellings that do face the street would be required to have street-facing entries and porches, but they would also be required to have some rear porch and entries that would also access the open space, because that's kind of what creates the communal environment of living in a courtyard development. And this is that model extruded and placed on a site in South Willamette.
This is similar to the pocket neighborhood concept.
Mm-hmm.
Would this allow, there was an article in the Register Guard 3, 4, 5 years ago about some folks out in the West End that actually took an existing home, turned it into their community home, and then their separate residents were mainly just, if I remember, I didn't even have a cooking facility. Would that allow this type of configuration?
I don't think so. I mean, this is assuming that you have all your facilities within your own dwelling. But we do have, we do have co-housing that has a little bit higher process.
In this example, I think you showed 2 driveways, upper and lower, to get to where those 4 cars are.
Mhm.
And just going through this, I mean, the driveways can count as open space?
No.
I thought I read that in there, that as long as they're not where the car's parked, but okay,
No, they
I'll see
can't.
if I find it again.
Okay. Driveways are...
Between cottage and courtyard.
Say that again, please.
So are you talking about the courtyard?
I'm not sure. I'm just saying that I
Courtyard
read,
it was.
Yeah.
The
The
one
courtyard.
we just did.
The flex space.
so the driveway can count as open space.
In that case.
In that one. the
But
flex-
that's the only type where that
Courtyard
could happen.
as flex space.
Okay, if that counts as open space and they've met their requirement, can they reduce the other type of open space and possibly put in another unit?
No. And there are restrictions on building coverage as well. You can only cover 50% of the site. So there's a variety of limits that, assure open space and vehicle space. And this is the height study for that type. And just to be specific, the inflection point is 18 feet, and with a slope setback, they can go up to 25. No, the inflection point is 12.
Yes.
Yeah, the inflection point is 12, and the single unit height is 18 feet. With a slope setback, you can go up to 25 feet. And that's to give you about 1.5 stories, because we felt like a 2-story cottage was outside of what the building type really reads as.
And I'm trying to remember, is there a limitation on the number of dormers and the sizes that
Yes,
we project? Yeah.
yeah, as far as intrusions. And that's it.
Thank you. Okay. Do we want to get started? Okay. So I've got Commissioner Mills, Commissioner Duncan.
Procedure, how are we going to do
Yeah,
this?
Oh.
that's what I was. we
General
gotta-
questions about presentation first and then into the matrix?
Well, yeah. Carol?
I'm sorry, just before that, I thought I'd jump in. And for those tuning in, it looks like we are now being recorded.
Okay.
And so
Yes.
we're
bit.
being joined kind of later in progress for those that might be watching this tape at a later time because
Thank
of a
you.
scheduling conflict.
Okay. Thank you, Carolyn. Okay. Commissioner Mills, then Commissioner Duncan. Oh, excuse me, procedure. I think maybe hit some general questions about the presentation, but I think Robin had indicated that the more specific we can be on recommendations in that, the more helpful that is for them. But I think having some general comments at the front end is still good. Okay, Commissioner Mills. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a general comment, question, request for confirmation. When we start moving into the row house, the smaller dwelling types in SFO, the ones that you've been targeting here this morning, it seems that in general that they're mostly, the concepts we've seen are mostly built around one space per dwelling on the site, and any second space or second vehicle or visitor space requirements are being fulfilled from the street.
That's correct, right?
Okay. And so my only comment about that is that requires a careful consideration of what the street is being used for. If, in the case of the South Willamette, we're near commercial areas, things like that. So that's my only comment.
We do have minimums and maximums for each type, and you'll see that in attachment B.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Duncan.
Just curious, I'm going to guess probably not yet, but I would ask that be done if possible. It's kind of a cost analysis. Developing small is very expensive because bathrooms and kitchens cost so much per square foot. And if you have a small dwelling, there's not a lot of more square footage to share that. I guess I'd be curious when you add in the requirements and the size limitations and parking and so on, if we could get an idea of what it would cost to develop, say, one of the projects that you showed us, because it'd be interesting if that number comes in to be $500,000 a living unit. Do we ever get there in today's dollars?
Mm-hmm. We actually did that analysis. Yeah, we looked at all the different development types that are being proposed for SFO, and we adapted the pro forma that we used for the rest of for multifamily development types, and there's some specifics there that we can talk about later on, but yeah, they end up being relatively expensive, I suppose, for the overall development type. Given current rent and lease rates or home prices, it probably isn't going to pencil, at least in the near future, to do these kinds of redevelopment for the most part. It seems like the housing types that were most viable were the ones that had the largest square footage, because you're making a lot of upfront investment in site work and lot division or what have you. But we can certainly dust that off and share it with the Planning Commission if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd be interested because, I'd be kind of interested to see what your base costs were, and then, from a lot standpoint, if you look, you're going to be if a developer's going to try to buy two houses or two lots, to do something like this, there already has a pre-existing structure on it, and I think those structures, it's going to be hard to believe those structures ever really go to zero as far as their contributory value to the property. So at some point, you've got to be able to develop enough on those sites to offset the cost of those improvements that are already existing on those lots. So it'd be kind of interesting to see, because you've got some additional site costs with, particularly if you don't have an alley access where you have to put driveways down the sides around the back, you've got more costs. Fire is likely going to require sprinkling of these types of projects that wherever there's attached. I mean, there's a number of elements in there, and the cost to develop these is going to be substantially higher than certainly a unit cost that we might have used for multifamily, because you're talking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units at a time.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that all was borne out by the study that we looked at. And this gets into the question of density too, and also what the architects told us, and or at least some of them who were looking at these development types told us in the test drive. They said, well, you could in theory get a little more dense. For example, if you had a cottage cluster that was actually 2 units instead of 1. If you did a 2-story cottage cluster, you could own the bottom one, rent out the top one, or vice versa. That would suddenly make a more affordable unit. It would be more likely to pencil out from a development standpoint, for a redevelopment standpoint. But because of the density limitations of 14 dwelling units an acre, you wouldn't be able to do that. And so, obviously, the less density you have, the less it's going to pencil out. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, because if you actually look at long-term historic costs to develop versus housing prices when you throw land at it, they pretty much parallel each other long-term. Now, certainly in the last several years, cost was higher than value maybe, but prior to that, when we had the escalation in value was substantially higher than cost. So, I mean, you kind of get to that point, but it would be interested to see where that is. One is because you've sort of got a kind of a set value area that's there, and if you try to develop within that, you're going to be affected by what's around you. So the value of what you're trying to create has to still fit within that value range of surrounding properties.
That's true, too.
I have myself in the queue. First, on the research sources that you listed, if you could send the links to those to us, that would be awesome. Okay. I know I'm familiar with a couple of those, but it would be real helpful, I think, as we cycle through this. The second thing is I really want to commend you for giving us, as an architect, giving us options in design and that flexibility of being able to determine, do we want to do courtyard, do we want to do row house, or just having that flexibility to be able to do something a little different than just the single family house on the lot, I think is real helpful, and I just appreciate that. Question that I have as far as the economics of some of the lot divisions in that is, I know you said you were looking at ways to divide the lots and how that might work and those sorts of things. I think that is helpful. I think having the ability to have that common, either common access, I think as Commissioner Duncan mentioned earlier, to be able to get in to those and have maybe if there is a simpler way to do that other than, I know I'm familiar with the cluster subdivision concept where you have common lots and different things like that. But if there's a simpler way to do that that's a little less intense for the developer and a little less involved to do and get in place, I think that would be helpful. And then also just considering perhaps some sort of SDC credit or reduction on especially some of the smaller units, because I know that can get really expensive. And I think that's something that's being looked at right now on the SDUs as a consideration, because sometimes those SDC costs can add $10 a square foot to the cost of the dwelling, and so those are not insignificant. So those are just my thoughts. Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on that same type of thing. I think looking at ways to incentivize these things. I know incentives are very difficult to get across, and I think that the STC avenue might be one area. Even if it's just, and I don't know if this would play out, but if you're combining two lots, can you combine the number of faucets and drains and all that stuff, or would it go to one? You know what I'm saying? If you've got the number of plumbing fixtures, make sure that those can combine if you're combining it and then doing it. Also, I mean, it's a tough sell, because the idea behind system development charges is that you're putting more use on the systems, the roads, the infrastructure, and all of that stuff, and those should be paid for. And those should be paid for by the developer. But yet, if we want more compact development and it doesn't pencil out, so there's your trade-off. I mean, if you don't pay SDCs, then there's not money going in for parks, and then then you don't have a pocket park for all these people. So that's a very complicated equation, to balance out. But I think that it needs to be looked at to try and figure out some sort of economic viability. Because if it's never going to get built, why, we can have a beautiful code and pretty pictures, but you're going to, if they're still allowing single-family housing in there, it's going to be single-family housing.
And if I could just add a little information there, we have been talking with Public Works quite a bit about the desire to be able to incentivize some of these smaller housing types like the SDUs and these other alternatives. And Public Works will be doing a fairly comprehensive update of all of their various SDC charges, and will be incorporating this incentive work into that overall effort. And they've committed to doing it, but it's going to take a little bit of time. As you know, those methodologies are very complex and takes a while to get through them. But we will be looking at all of that through that upcoming effort.
Thank you. I have Commissioner Duncan in the queue, but I haven't heard yet from Commissioner Jaworski. If you want to, okay, Commissioner Duncan.
Following that, the SDC conversation, I would assume that if I'm removing 2 dwellings, that there would be SDC credits as there is for commercial developments and everything else. I mean, really what you're looking at here is probably removing a typical Rambler with 2-car garage and, maybe 2 bathrooms and a kitchen and so on, and you're adding back in hopefully a single car, because people want to reduce car use in these types. And so transportation actually may get less overall. Certainly the sewer system is there, although maybe capacity changes. So, yeah, I'd like to see something that really incentivizes that. But on the other side of it, you can't get to a point where you give them so much that you burden the system other places and penalize other users of that, too. So there's a little odd trade-off there. It happens. Another question, and I'm probably wrong on this, but it seems to me that some time ago I remember in R1 zones that you cannot assemble 2 existing addressed properties. I'm looking over there because I think the code person's going to tell me that.
They've done it in my neighborhood recently.
Were they consolidated lots?
Oh, there's a house that sits on 2 lots.
No, the other way around, where if I have 2 houses separately addressed and I want to combine them for a single development. I thought we had a code about reducing single-family lot inventory.
I think we have a maximum lot size.
Yeah, there's a maximum.
Yeah, a lot.
Well, there's the other question. Does maximum lot size come into play here?
Yeah, good point.
Because I think-
The zone will no longer apply, so it depends what's in this particular zone. Now, I'm thinking that because the houses will be on individual lots, but the only thing.
Well, not necessarily.
Row houses.
Right. The row houses are individual lots.
Well, it depends on how you decide to do that. But what we were talking about earlier is if you were looking at it as a rental-type project, you would have to subdivide. And under our current R1 requirements, you would have to subdivide because you're not allowed to have more than X number of units per lot.
Right, and, the lot size issue in R1 is really because it gets people really on the low end of the
Right.
density spectrum, which I don't think is the issue here. You might have a lot that's that size, but it has,
Okay, I asked because I saw nothing about the discussion of lot size and maximums and minimums and everything like that throughout this document.
Good question. We'll
Yeah, I
be
think it
thinking
is.
about that with a lot, because you do want to be able to consolidate lots. And-
Well, a lot of times what you have to do in a development like this is you have to consolidate first
Yep.
before you can start doing other elements, and you don't want to get caught consolidate. Well, you can't consolidate. We can allow you to divide them, but we can't allow you to consolidate. So it's just, our code is fairly complex, and there's other places that it reaches out and grabs some of these special area overlays.
Which actually might be a good segue into some of the detailing or detailed suggestions that we might have on this. And I think I wouldn't preclude any general comments either at this point, but I think it'd probably be good to start looking at some of the more detailed concerns that we have. And I know I had one, so I'll start, and I think Commissioner Jaworski had mentioned that. Similar one, too. me find it here on attachment B.
Are we going to go through them one at a time, or just?
I guess we could. What's your preference? Just go linear, start at the top, work our way down?
I think so.
Okay, let's do that. Then I'll hold mine. So that would mean we are starting on page 9, attachment B?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And on the height, I think, is there any, Commissioner Mills?
Yeah, mine is not on the height, but it's on the R1.5 row house designation, and that's just, this is a general question. Somewhere along the line, and maybe it was a presentation where I thought we were eliminating in SFO the 1.5 designation. And it,
In the university area, you don't allow the R1.5, but I think.
in the South
Well,
Willamette area,
Right.
my understanding was it's gone, and it's used repeatedly here.
Well, this is in the chart, the
Current code standard.
current code
Yes,
standard
okay.
proposal.
Okay, so we're good, never mind.
There you go. That's where it disappears when it moves to the right.
When it moves
Go
to the right, it's
proposal,
gone.
That's where it
Okay.
disappears. Okay. Anything else on
It's sort
height?
of like life in general.
I think I'll just comment that I appreciate that the clarity that it's basically the same as what we have in the current R1 zone. I think you were mentioning, Jennifer, that the roof slope at 8 and 12 as opposed to 6 and 12 for the additional 7 feet, which is the one thing that's different from the R1. But other than that, it's virtually the same.
Lower heights.
And the lower heights on cottage clusters. Oh,
And-
yeah, actually,
and
yeah, it
even
is
the
30.
general,
No,
yeah.
it is, yeah, SFO, it's 30.
Other than R1, row house.
So if I built a single-family house in this, I could only go to 30.
Yeah,
Unless you had a
single-family
6-12
detached.
pitch, then you could go 37.
No.
812.
No?
No, that's what it's saying. Before it was 30 or
Currently.
37.
Oh, I thought you were asking currently.
No, if this goes over and I'm just building a
sticking
single-family
a ro-
house, it's going to be lower.
Yes,
Right.
lower than current code.
And I don't have a problem with that. I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay.
It would affect single-family houses as well as the cottage clusters and the
Okay.
row houses.
Do we see many single-family houses that go to the 37 feet?
Two-story.
Okay. Okay. Slope setback, I think we've talked about that a little bit. Any other? I'm just going to scroll through and,
Yeah, no, actually,
Yeah.
the presentation clarified a number of my questions.
yeah. I think, well, anything else on page 9? John?
Yeah, just a clarification on dormers. I read somewhere that if there's a dormer, it has to have 10 by 10 habitable. This doesn't say that, so this doesn't apply. I'm a little confused there.
It says
by
that it needs
6.
to be attached to habitable space.
On
But
page
the
9, it says that?
maximum width is 10 feet.
Yeah.
Maximum width is 10 feet.
I didn't see where it said habitable here, which are the general guidelines, but I read it somewhere else, and I was wondering if it also meant here.
So you can't use it as just an architectural
Right.
element on a roof.
It can't be a fake dormer, basically.
And limiting the size is to avoid some of those gable ends that,
Extend forever.
yeah.
Okay, so this has to be habitable then, on page 9. Okay, because it doesn't say that. That's what I was wondering. If it didn't say it, did it have to be, and it only applied where it said it?
Some of this was pulled from the code that's in development, and so I think that some of it's a little more explicit than other areas.
Okay, so it is required, habitable. Thank you.
Page 10, windows, interior lot line facing, I had one, and I know Commissioner Jaworski, I think, had the same question, is
Yeah.
a little bit of confusion, I think, in the way it's worded on the window offsets. Windows facing interior lot lines required to offset from abutting dwellings by 12 inches. And that, I'm assuming that that's adjacent to an existing building on the adjacent lot. And I guess my two questions. One, how far does that building have to be away from the lot line for this to kick in? If it's 30 feet away, is it an issue? And then the second question is, in lieu of the offset, I think, Jennifer, you were saying earlier that landscape screening is an option for that. And then since the intent, I think, is to keep people from looking into other people's backyards, could obscure glass on a window meet that requirement so that you have a frosted window, you still get the light in, but you don't have that privacy concern? Just maybe a suggestion to consider adding that as an option for some of that. Does that address your question, Commissioner Jaworski?
Yeah, right now, any kind of obscuring glass isn't proposed.
Okay.
There is some language within the standards about how close you need to be to the setback in order for this to kick in.
Okay, so that is in the standards there. Okay. Do you know offhand how close that is?
Well, I think it was 20 feet.
20? Okay. Okay.
And just to clarify, you're just proposing adding obscure glass as an option?
Yes. In that particular section, because I think it achieves the same thing, still allows people to get light in, not having to resort necessarily to a clear story window. Any other? I'm just going to take it maybe by page, since we seem to not have a lot of questions. Anything else on page 10? Commissioner Duncan.
Just some clarity on building setback. I'm not sure I understand where it says additional interior property line setbacks may apply to certain transition conditions. Two questions there. We're talking about cluster housing and we're talking about cottage, and if we start dividing those into separate properties, you end up having property lines. How are we dealing with those? Because it does. I don't know if this is talking about single family options, row houses, or whatever else, but
This is between zones, isn't it?
This is
Or not zones, so.
SFO.
Yeah, we're clarifying how to do the language on that, but
Okay.
it's basically refers to the development site and then anything abutting the development site. It doesn't refer to interior lot divisions within the development site.
so is a development going to be what is proposed at a particular period of time? Let's say that I buy 8 lots and I want to build them out 2, 2, 2, and 2. Does each 2 then stand alone? Or can I have all 8 considered as one?
Well, we've been having lots of meetings and discussions about how to kind of make our intent happen.
Okay.
And some ways of doing that is that you have to propose, it's almost like a little kind of mini PUD, where you do have to propose a development type.
Let's not use that word anywhere in this process.
That you are going to have to specify what your development type is. The intent is not that you can then subdivide the land and sell off the lots just to be developed. However, so the way around that is that we're looking at maybe having the permitting having to be submitted all at once. Is that where?
But
we're
again,
kind of
if I think this could be a real great development concept, and I'm willing to step out and pick up the first 2 lots, and during that I get lucky, and because part of the problem I see with this is when you try to assemble, if you buy the first one, the next person thinks they got gold in their pocket, so they're going to try to get a lot of money out of you for the next lot, and then that continues on down. So what I'm after is, how do you make the mechanism work so that if I think it really is a good idea, but I can do it at 2 lots at a time, or I can get 3 lots or 4 lots, but I only want to develop 2 and sort of get that sold and get that money generated before I can really commit to do the next one, or I want to test what I'm doing. Because you're asking people to develop something that really hasn't been tested, and you don't know if it's going to work until you try it. And if it works, great, you're going to try the next 2. If it doesn't work, you're going to forget the next 2. So it's kind of like, it's real important how we define interior lines and how we define development site and how we define, because that may be either create a win or create a break point for somebody if you're not paying attention to how those lines are actually defined throughout this process.
That's a good point.
So
And
just,
then the other thing gets to be, which follows, is lot coverage. And again, if you say 50% of the lot, but I want to build cottages, and I want to build 5 of them, and I'm going to end up with a bunch of common space, how do I do 50% of my lot if my lot's a postage stamp lot? So I'm just cautioning you on, we're kind of thinking, a lot of this stuff to me is coming sort of out of the way we always have approached single-family dwelling. And I think that some of this almost needs to sort of lean to look at, I'm going to use multifamily as the idea, because it's not really, but you've got to take a look at the structure, because you can't say 50% lot coverage for SFO if SFO is 5 cottages on a lot, or on 2 lots, because my lot may actually be defined as nothing more than the footprint, and then the common area is under some sort of common homeowners association.
Well, when we did look at, we do have some lot standards, and the idea is that you have your footprint, or however big your particular lot is, and then the common space would be evenly divided. That would, push you up to that. I think it's 3,111 square feet to fit within the low-density residential.
So again, if I'm building, just so I'm clear on this, your thoughts are, and I don't need the code written now, but I'm just trying to make us aware of what my concerns are. So if I have a development site like you had up here, and I want to put 5 cottages, and they're each going to sit on their own little lot, then I'm looking at lot coverage of the entire project as developed, even though I might end up with 5 little postage stamp
Right,
lots
because you
inside
get a
it.
percentage of whatever the common spaces are.
Okay, I guess I caution you on how you write this so we don't stumble somewhere down the road.
Yes.
yeah, I'd say, Commissioner Duncan, the comments that you're bringing up are in the forefront of our mind as we're thinking about subdivision and how that's all going to work. We understand that there's significant differences between dividing land for cottage clusters or some of these other development types and the traditional large lot subdivisions. So I think we haven't sorted it all out yet. Still working on that. But what we'll definitely do is keep that in mind, and keep in mind the fact that we want to streamline the process. We don't want to create more process.
Right.
So fewer barriers, not more. And then the other main criteria is, and I think that we've talked a lot about in the whole discussion, is flexibility. How can we add flexibility into the process, at the same time having some guarantee that what's going to come out at the end is what was intended in the beginning. So we're going to have to thread that needle somehow, but I'd suggest that maybe we come back and talk
That's
about
fine.
that at a later date. Yeah.
Yep.
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, this is a little bit of piling on, and I'll apologize if it ends up being repetitious. But Jennifer, you made a statement, and I want to make sure I got it. You made a comment something like that we want to prevent subdivision and creation of lots, and I guess I kind of, this was in answering Commissioner Duncan's questions, and I just want to make sure I didn't misunderstand. Is there a concern, or what are the concerns if somebody does some kind of assembly and wants to create lots for development? Now, I understand in the complexities around cluster. Is that something you're concerned about? And maybe I just misunderstood what your phrase meant. That's highly possible.
Well, we want to avoid having someone divide an existing lot into a lot of smaller lots and then have them be able to sell off those lots to individuals and not have an expected development out of that.
So you don't want them individually developed.
But this gets back to your term, it almost is like a mini PUD, too. I mean, if a person has a plan, and you're saying that let's say they assemble a couple of lots and they have a cluster development, that I guess you would perhaps normally have lot lines, that you would not want them to sell those lots in an undeveloped condition. You'd want them to complete the development and sell it, and then sell the dwellings.
They would have the option to sell the lots, but they would have already had to identify a development type,
Yeah?
and they would have to be permitted at the same time, so that there would be some design standards that then would apply to the development.
It sounds like they might have had to design the building, the structures, to get the permits.
To some extent, I mean, maybe if I could just jump in here. Imagine a scenario where somebody consolidates a couple of lots, and they say, I want to do a cottage subdivision. And so they divide it into, say, 5 smaller lots. And as part of this, they come in, they say, okay, this is how we're going to divide it. These are where the home's going to be. This is where the common space is. These are how the pathways connect all of these lots. And it has to be coordinated, because if one piece is missing, let's say somebody buys an individual lot and they say, well, I don't need that path there. I'm just going to throw that out. There wouldn't be any way for us to apply a set of standards other than a regular single-family set of standards to that individual lot.
Okay.
See what I'm saying? So you can't necessarily. It wouldn't make sense for the development as a whole to develop each individual lot in a vacuum. You'd have to have some assurance up front that what gets built on each individual lot is going to work with the overall development intent.
Okay.
But then in that case, again, going back to your scenario, would there be flexibility where the developer could maybe offer 3 different floor plans to that cottage? You know, so that he comes in and you say, okay, here's this cottage is going to go on this footprint, but you could have master bedroom upstairs and this downstairs, you know, and they could put maybe in their building permit, they could say, this building is going to be one of these 3 options, so that people have a feel that they're, you know, being able to at least have some input into the house that they're going to be building. I don't know if that's possible or not, but you know, you can say, here's the footprint. It's going to be, I've got 4 different designs. You can pick, they all fit on the footprint, but it's going to be different than the guy next door.
I guess, you know, where I'm at is just, we talked about trying to keep flexibility in this thing and giving the developers the flexibility they need, while also making sure we end up with what we want for our community. I'm just, you know, looking for the inadvertent roadblocks we might be putting up, and trying to make sure we at least understand why they're there, and if there's a way to minimize their impact.
Commissioner
I'm
Jaworski.
kind of looking at Rick and Bill, and as I say this, because you guys are the guys that actually do this stuff, not me, so.
I have some thoughts, but I'll share them later. Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I originally raised my hand because of Commissioner Duncan. I had similar questions, and I'd also like to respond to the latter discussion also. All my initial concerns, anytime you look at minimums and maximums, it creates all kinds of scenarios, as Commissioner Duncan elaborated upon, postage stamp lot, etc. I just, when I read this, assumed that this is going to have the flexibility that a developer can come in and ask for adjustments in a case like that. So that's my first question. Am I assuming too much, that these are so fixed that there are no adjustments or exemptions? That's the first part. The second part, I like that discussion because I want to know, I personally experienced that where there's been a development, let's say it's not cottage this and that, but there was a development, I bought into it, and then up comes this thing, well, the economy's changed, so the whole development has changed. Now, someone does this drawing, we're not living on what I wanted to live on. So are you saying that if someone came in with 5 lots and said, this is the layout, and this is where the pavements and streets are going to be, they can't change that? So when I buy that first lot before the other 4 are sold, I know what that area is going to look like? Or can they come in later and say, man, we haven't been able to move these houses, it's been 5 years, I need to change the whole thing? That's my question.
What do you think?
Tried two of them.
I think we've discussed a little bit throughout the whole zone what would be adjustable and what wouldn't, that there would be things that were maybe off limits.
So
I
it's
could say
called
that
the
as
buyer
far as
beware code,
adjustments.
okay.
Well, no, I'm not
I got
talking
it.
about like site layout or things like that, but there might be some things within the design code that are, we say are off limits, isn't it? I mean, for adjustments.
Well, I would think so. I mean, in terms of what you're talking about, I think you can look at adjustments from two different perspectives. What you're saying is if somebody proposes a development on a site, let's say 5 cottage clusters, it seems like if that's going to be approved, there ought to be some assurance that that's also how it's going to be developed. Now, there's suggestions to allow a little bit of flexibility within that, like if you wanted to change the windows or the porch or maybe the configuration. I thought I turned that off. The portion of your building a little bit, sure, maybe there's some things that are reasonable to allow flexibility. But overall, it seems like there should be the integrity of the concept that you would have to follow. Now, there's another kind of flexibility overall where you could say, well, as someone is coming in to do their initial development and there's a requirement for 50% coverage on the site or something like that. I don't know if that's a good example, but they say, well, there's a circumstance here where we have we're trying to save an old tree. Can we adjust that so that we have 52% coverage instead? Is that still going to be okay? That
was my two questions. Can
Yeah.
they make an adjustment, which would be up front? And my second latter part is once that's, I'd like to call it etched in stone, it doesn't get changed as you buy things,
Yeah.
as a buyer.
Yeah. I don't think we've established yet what the threshold is for adjustments. I know that's come up a few times in conversation. But we will, and we know that that's important. And the answer to the second question is I think it's going to have to be pretty clear that most of the important elements in that subdivision agreement, whatever that looks like, will have to carry forward.
Okay. I have myself in the queue, then Commissioner Duncan, and I think I echo some of the concerns about what's been brought up as far as, if you come in and they build the first one and then, things go sideways or whatever. But it seems like that initial plan would still have to have the overall style, the overall footprint, and a lot of those elements, at least as I was looking through this, it seems like those elements pretty much all have to be there at the front end, if I'm understanding it right, to be able to do that. And so I think those really shouldn't change, although when you have the options later for the architectural detail, facade articulation, being able to make some of those minor adjustments if somebody, as Commissioner Borowski I think said, if they want the master bedroom over here or over there or whatever, as long as it still fit within that overall metric that was originally approved, it seems like that should be okay to make some of those minor adjustments, but not change the overall development plan. And how you end up wording that can be a challenge. But then my other comment that I was reserving to say until later is just really, again, and I think Robin, you hit on this, to really try and make all of this initial process simpler rather than more complex. And I see a lot of elements here that are very similar to cluster subdivisions.
All right.
Just go ahead and finish the game.
Yeah. But some of the elements with cluster subdivisions and the way those are set up with lots that are pretty much defined by the building footprint, common areas that people buy into. I mean, you've got to basically have that entire development still retain some of that ownership or the common areas or the easements or however it's defined don't work. And so I think you've still got to have that development site, whether you call it a subdivision or not, it's still a development site. And I think being able to word that in a way that makes it simpler to start with so that you don't maybe have to go through the whole subdivision process, but you've still got maybe a site plan review or some sort of thing that meets the elements so you show how you've met that. And maybe it doesn't have to be the complete detail ready to go in for permits, but enough that gives some assurance down the road. Commissioner Duncan.
Yeah, I think, again, to follow up on that, not try to, I guess, sort of keep kicking the can down the road, I agree with both Commissioner Jaworski and Randall that it's important to have some assurity in this, but I understand flexibility because it's sort of, anytime you have a new product in a new market area, people are going to learn from it. And hopefully they learn quickly and everything turns out. The second comment really is, I like flexibility, and I think that's important. I understand why we have adjustment review, but flexibility is part of the process of kind of getting an approved plan. Adjustment review adds costs and uncertainty to the project, so I guess we want to pay attention to what elements we call flexible and what we call reviewable, an adjustment review. That's part of it. And then my second one, back to lot coverage, I assume we have a strong definition on what is included in lot coverage? Because I've discovered in Springfield, it was sort of, they just changed theirs recently, about a year or so ago, and it was kind of like, oh, is that what we said? Oh, is that what we said? And there was a lot of things in there that created a lot of confusion, so good, happy to hear that.
The
Thanks.
intent of this is that it's all roof structures. That does occur in our code, but it's not necessarily what's in R1 right now.
One of the clarities they did over there was you require eaves, but under eaves is landscaping, so it shouldn't be part of lot coverage.
Right, it could be building footprint or
Yeah,
roof
something like
structures.
that. But again, buildings include porches and patios, and does a patio that's not covered, is that part of it? But then is it, if I later on decide to cover it after I buy the property or buy the house, now I get to cover it, and that, I mean, again, it's, what does all that mean?
Okay. Anything else on page 10? Page 11, we have building size. Commissioner Borowski?
I was looking at the individual dwelling unit sizes have a maximum width of 25 and a minimum of 15. If you wanted a wider row house, is 25 feet the right number? I guess is my question. The 25 feet fits in if you want to put six into a 150-foot lot, but if I've got a 150-foot lot and I only want to put four in, can I go 35 feet? I'm just questioning whether.
I have a
talked
circle
about
with
that
you.
last
Yeah.
meeting, and I can't remember.
Kristen
Kristen
but I think it
brought
might
that
have
up.
been on was that on retail that she was thinking?
No, that was
No,
on
that
door
was on-
separation.
Oh, yeah,
That was
door
on-
separation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember that from last time, and I just want to bring that up and make sure that that's what we want. Do we want a 25-foot wide house, or do we want one that is bigger?
Well,
Commissioner Duncan?
to me, I had the same thing. I hate the idea we start limiting without really a basis for what 25 feet, where it came from, why is it there, is it architectural standards, whatever else, because again, let's say I get to a lot that's only, I don't know what it would be, 90 feet deep, and I can get my 150 feet, but I want to put my garages in the back, and when I get all said and done, if I stuck with 25 feet, I get a property that's 20 feet deep. To me, that limitation in width, I don't understand why we would limit that. I guess I understand to have a maximum, make sure we don't end up with, two units that are each 100 feet wide or something like that. I don't know, but it's, the 25 feet to me seems real tight. And maybe I just need to be educated on why that's a good number. I don't know. And the other part, right in that same thing, is 1,000 feet seems small to me, too, for a cottage. I understood what you told me, but again, I always question when we have just some arbitrary number that we choose. I would have thought 1,200 or 1,250 to me is a small one, because if I have three,
Yeah.
and I could see that if we put up, it can't be more than a certain footprint size, And again, I don't know how, if I have 800 square feet of floor area, 850, and I only have 150 feet up, that seems kind of small to me if I want to make that my master with my bathroom and everything else, or whatever. I don't know, the numbers to me just seem kind of a little on the small side, both of them did.
Jen, do you have any information on in your research, what speaks to the 25-foot width or the 1,000-foot limit, or?
It was that it could fit on the lots there that are fairly smallish urban scale lots. And so that seemed to make sense. If you consolidated 2 lots, you could still get a number of row houses with your driveway easement and things. And you could get 3, at the 15 was because then you could get, if you had alley access, you could get 3 on a single lot.
Imagine living in 15.
And still get your setbacks.
I mean, that's from there to there.
Those are pretty standard as far as minimums and maximums.
I wonder if another, and I'll just throw this out, the idea is to try to increase density. Is there, and I don't know if there's any standards anywhere, but it would seem that if you required an increase in the number of dwelling units per lot, you could create a mix of different. Maybe you end up with one of them being 20 feet wide and one being 30 feet wide, another one being 20 and another one being 30, but you've increased, say in those 2 lots from 2 units, you've increased to 4. It just sounds like we're trying to make this flexible, but we're prescribing stuff.
Yeah.
And I understand that we're doing some of that for needed housing purposes too. Just some of this I leave up to the architects because they actually understand all this stuff a lot better than I do. That's why I look at you.
Yeah, I noticed several of you looking at me.
And Christian's not here, so we can't look at our
What do you
new
think,
planning
Bill?
commissioner.
I'm going to jump the queue a minute here because Commissioner Jaworski also has his hand up, and I also want to remind us that we're not getting through a lot of these, and we've got 20 minutes left, so just a time check here. I think, just as an architect's response on the maximum 1,000 square feet, it I think might be nice to have a little bit more, but again, looking at the character of what we're trying to do there, I think I think you still have to say, if you say 1,200 or 1,250, what if I want to do 1,280? At some point, I think you have to draw the line. So whether 1,000 is the right place to do that or not, I don't know yet. So I'll say that. On the 25-foot width as a maximum and the minimum 15, I think I have less problem with the minimum 15. I think the maximum, we might allow that to go a little higher or maybe not even have a maximum, but, again, how you do those parameters so that you kind of lock in a little more of what you're wanting to do is I think important. So, a maximum 32 might be better or something along those lines. Again, I'm not completely sure. I think I'd be, did any of the architects in the test drive look at row houses and some of that? And might we be getting some information back related to comments on like widths and square footages and that? Do you know?
The comments that they made was that they thought the height at that time was too restrictive.
Okay.
It's the inflection point, really, not so much the height as the inflection point for the slope setback.
Okay.
They didn't make any negative comments about the width.
Width for square feet?
I think the general intent is that these are supposed to be smaller dwellings. They're a little bit higher end of the density. So to keep the impact down, we're modulating the form maybe more than we would in other areas. And so I think any of these measurements kind of speak to that.
Okay. I have Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I was going to speak to the same issue primarily in the maximum because I didn't know what the depth of the lots would be. And you've explained something, you've said something just now that these I guess row homes or row houses are you're looking at them as smaller units. I didn't know that. So my question was going to be, in order to support either wide or widths, because the height is restricted, if I'm going to develop and I say I'm thinking of building anywhere from 4 to 6 units that can fit on this lot, do I have to have it all laid out? Because I know the people that are developing across from me are selling them before they're building them. And what if someone comes in and says, I'm really interested in this, are these high-end? And if they are, which they may or may not be, I don't know, I may want 4 bedrooms, each with a bath. I may want a larger place because I want to be in that area. And I would find that restrictive if you have the height and the size this way. And I guess that's why I was asking, but you've just said that you're looking at smaller row homes here. I didn't.
Well, we have the step up to the apartment with the row house character.
Step up to the.
A step up as far as intensity and size and scale.
So is there a square foot limit on these row homes? In other words, are they 2,200 feet? Can they be 3,000 or 4,000 feet if they had more width, if someone really wanted that for whatever reason?
They're limited within the massing shape that they need to fit into, whether it's height or building length.
So they don't have a square foot like the 1,000 for the cottage?
Right. That's correct.
Okay, then that's probably why I didn't think they were looked at as to be smaller units. If that's your intent, you should indicate that they can't exceed X then. And I guess my other question was, would the developer have to lay out all those sizes as he submits it, or could he say, this is what I want to do, and I have the people who want to buy these X wide, but I have this one person, for whatever reason, wants to live in that area, and they're offering to buy this, and they want a row home, or they want more to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but I'm just trying to say, if you don't have a maximum of square footage, then I see that as an issue. I'll put it that way.
So you're
Well, we could
you're
definitely go
suggesting
bigger.
a square footage maximum on the row houses is what you're suggesting?
Well, there isn't any, so I was
Right.
just wondering if there's a height limitation, and we're talking about being wider, then what is it? Because if someone really, I'm being redundant here, really wants to live there, has the money, and it's high-end, and the builder's going to build it, he's not building 6 of these things and then putting them on the market. At least I don't. Maybe he is, or maybe he's building one at a time. That's what I'm asking. What has to be in that plan of that row home sector on that lot before he can start?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the earlier discussion, and we'll come back and
Okay.
have some proposals for that.
We have Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Borowski.
Real brief, I guess I just wanted to make a comment about the cluster housing, and I guess I'm leaning towards allowing a little bit more than 1,000, understanding that we are trying to keep these smaller. Regarding the 25-foot width or square footage, the concern I have in this is assuring that we give the flexibility so that these units will pencil out, because they're going to be higher cost units. And so, I think where we start putting this restriction and that restriction on, we start driving up the cost, to get it designed and get it permitted, because you've got all these envelope requirements, and then B, are you going to be able to actually make it pencil? So I would probably be leaning towards a little more width. I'm not sure about a square footage requirement, simply because, to me, that might be a flexibility issue. But I'm still listening. So.
Commissioner Borowski.
And I'm going to piggyback on that. I mean, that's where I'm looking at. If we're building row houses and we want to make them economically viable, they may, I'm thinking of the row houses over on Walnut Street that I saw built, 25 feet. Building small is expensive. And if you got 120 feet and you want to put, or 150 feet and you want to put 6, and you've got to charge $400,000 a unit, who's going to buy a 25-foot wide $400,000 unit? Whereas if you're going to build, instead of 6, you're building 4, then maybe somebody will pay $400,000 for a 30-foot, more square footage, and it's going to cost the same to build, or similar, or even less to build, because you're putting less fixtures and stuff like that. So, again, economic viability is part of the equation, and making it too small might be tough.
Commissioner Duncan.
It sounds like most of us are concerned about size and width somewhat. Has there been any information? It seems to me, I understand keeping them smaller, but again, we talk about flexibility, and I was wondering, is there a way to say that the average size of the unit doesn't exceed X square feet? So I have the ability to build let's say that's 1,000 feet. I could build a 1,200 square footer and an 800 square footer in the same project. And the average width can't be more, and again, I'll just use 25 feet, but I could build one at 30 and one at 20. It allows, one, from an architectural standpoint, you get to vary the front. It doesn't look like the same box walking down all 6 units. So just, and I don't know what those averages should be, but you might say it can't exceed certain average, and it can't be any smaller than 15, any wider than 32, or whatever those numbers are. But it allows for, again, flexibility, shape, size, design, appeal, colors, all kinds of things.
I think I'll jump in on that one, and I think I would say if we do, I'm intrigued by the idea of an average for the development, but I think if you do an average, I wouldn't put a minimum or a maximum on it, at least on the widths. You might want to on the square footage.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I don't think I would
open.
on the widths, because if you're doing a minimum, let's say 15 and a maximum 32, then you've kind of established an average anyway. To a certain
Yeah, I mean,
degree.
I don't know if that would be appropriate or not,
Yeah.
but, you know, if we want to keep them to a smaller size, but we allow it to be an average, so again, you could get something a little larger, and you get the one a little smaller.
Well, then if you get that one design and your maximum, let's say, is 25, and you really need 26 or 28,
Right.
and you can make that up somewhere else, or you've got a bigger lot or something like that,
Right.
it might add to that flexibility
as we
and still
all
keep
know-
it within the overall parameters.
All lots are not necessarily rectangular.
True.
Mine.
Okay. We're at 120, architectural detail, facade articulation. I'll jump in and say I think it's great the way you've listed those out there, and I think it's very specific. I also appreciate the materials and finish category as far as durable finishes and materials, and premium siding and material color changes and those sorts of things. I think that's real helpful. And it still gives actually quite a bit of flexibility.
Is one only enough?
Materials and finishes, 2.
Yeah, I guess you're doing the whole.
The feedback from the AIA was that how many options we were expecting people to choose was not enough.
So they
You
suggested
should have higher expectations.
higher expectations.
So
and more
instead of one,
options. Yeah.
pick 2. And that's what I was asking,
Yeah.
is one enough? Because, I mean, I saw one later, I don't know where it was, but it was like planting a tree was one of the options, and they only needed to do one option.
We wanted to make the sustainability sort of easy to do, because this was kind of introducing it for the first time into code.
I think I have.
But I would
I would take plant
Forget
a
if
tree
there's
out.
Commissioner Mills.
Mine was a quick one. Is this sort of from the test drive you had? I actually thought that, I mean, you got 5 on number 1, and I think there's 6 on number 2. Can there be more of those in each one of these categories? And as maybe Commissioner Borowski said, you end up with 10 and you have to choose 3 of them?
Yeah.
Or is it better to limit the number and only ask you to do 1 or 2 of them? I don't necessarily need an answer, just more of a thought about it. Just
Yeah, I'll throw another comment out that the AIA test drivers gave us, which was that, hey, you can require more so that invariably there's some low-hanging fruit
Right.
in each one of these, like, some window trim and a little thing over here.
Right.
And it doesn't appreciably change the impact of the design. And so what they're saying is, if you allow those things, then you better require enough that you get higher into those bigger picture design elements to make a difference, or you drop the lower ones off.
Or have two-tier. You could have two-tier where if it's the low-hanging fruit, you got to do two of them to count as one.
Right. Or someone suggested to have a point system or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
complex.
I don't know.
Like
It's
that.
just, I mean, because, you'll get the people that will just use the low ones. And even
Plant a tree and be done.
plant a tree and be
Well,
done.
I mean,
I'm
it's-
sustainable.
To a certain extent, I'm always cautious on this because the more requirements you have for cost, the higher it costs to buy one of these.
Yep.
And it kind of depends on where we're going. I mean, builders in general are going to try to maximize their profits, and they're going to try to weigh the pluses and the minuses most of the time. And that's why I ask about cost analysis. Did we go through this whole thing and actually build one of these the way we think it ought to be built by picking two of these and three of those and doing this and doing that and so on and so forth, and say, what do I get to in cost? Because again, if that cost gets to be $500,000, gee, we're going to have a beautiful code and no buildings. So we got to pay attention, because I think that neighborhood, I'm going to guess the average price of homes out there is probably $200,000 plus or minus. I don't know. But you got to fit that somehow, too.
Commissioner Mills.
That wasn't short, but
Mine is a little more technical in aspect in terms of the life of this code and listing out the sustainable features, of which 20 years from now, there'll be another dozen that we haven't even conceptualized or even know of right now. And this code's still going to be enforced, and you're going to be enforcing antiquated sustainable features. Some of them will be proved in time, and they'll be great. Others say, well, that's proven to be problematic. We're not going to do that. I think you need to consider how you're going to handle future development in this.
Good point.
I think that might need to be a language that says, maybe there's something that says you can propose something, or some kind of way of evaluating things, because this is not going to stand still. This is going to change over time. It's going to change more quickly than I think any of us think. So I'd be very cautious about saying, here it is, this is the cookie cutter, choose your shape and go, or choose multiple shapes, because there's things here that, there are already things that are not here that could be here. And I'm sure that, 10 years from now, there'll be another dozen items that will want to be there.
I can say a couple things about that. The materials and finishes is another question, and that comes up with the mixed use in the apartment condo, and that's one of the gripes in Portland about their design code. So it would have to be a consideration where certain areas, if we did expect them to be code standards, that they would have to maybe be areas that were updated more frequently than the standard code. And then the other aspect on the sustainable features, we're having to choose ones that are in our code somewhere and enforceable and inspectable by the City of Eugene, not a third party like LEED. And so as those change, then the wording of the code will be open-ended enough, like on solar panels and things, that as those codes move up, it will refer back to them. Although that doesn't, take into account things that haven't been, invented yet, I guess. Do you want to say anything about that?
I don't pretend to have the answer. I just know how things
Right.
work technically, and it's going to change.
We are working with our green building division.
And I think that's a good point. I do think the idea of only requiring one feature and having one of those being to plant or retain one tree per dwelling is not enough.
too low.
The fruit's too low there. Other comments on some of the general standards? We've still got quite a few to get through and running out of time.
Just to get through.
You mean like windows on?
Yeah, I'm thinking we're going into windows for window coverage, interior lot facing, site access.
I think access and parking is going to be
Gonna be the
more
next
than 2
one.
minutes.
Yeah. Will we have time next week?
Robin?
Well, so I would like to get the transportation, or the street design standards in front of commission sooner rather than later, because we're going to be going out and having conversations with the community about some of these concepts, and I want to make sure that the commission is at least aware of the concepts before we do that. So what I would propose is that we go ahead and have John Rowell's presentation at the next event, and then following that, have just presentation of the transportation element, the street design element. And then we can either start off on having a conversation with that, which would probably be a good idea because it'll be fresh in our minds, and we can circle back around to this, I'm going to say in September.
I wonder if another option is to have people respond in writing. Just
I
go
was
through it on
wondering
your
that's a
own and
great option.
send email
Thank
to
you.
keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
I actually was thinking of that, Carolyn, as far as any of the other specific items, if you have specific questions or concerns about them, to put that in writing and do the group email. We don't violate any public meetings things
No.
with that.
Nope.
So we're not deliberating or anything. We're just,
Which email
it's
address should we
informative.
use?
Yep.
We have two.
I would say use Jennifer's.
Okay.
Do we have hers?
We
be
should
there.
have, I think.
Oh, sorry, it's not there, but I'll make sure that you get it.
Okay.
Okay.
And then make sure that, I mean, for me personally, when I hear the other commissioners talk, it makes things more clarified and brings up things that I may not have thought about. And so to just me go through and say, oh, well, I don't know about this. There were a lot of things I heard
Exactly,
today
yeah.
that I heard from other people that I would have wanted to weigh in. So if it is doing it, at least make sure that all of those go to everybody, so we get a little bit of that, a little bit of that, because that's
And-
how, for me, that it works so much better that way. Because a lot of this stuff is new to me, and so hearing from the more seasoned commissioners helps me out.
And I think as long as people are just putting out issues and concerns and not somehow deliberating over what the outcome of that is, that should be fine.
Okay.
Just a reminder, everybody, too, that my email address has changed.
Yes.
So please try to use the new one, and if you're not sure what it is, I'll give it to you after the meeting.
Okay. And I think just to tag on to all of that as we're communicating to, as Commissioner Borofsky said, I think to communicate maybe a little bit of the why or the reasoning of what our thought is as far as driveways or access or windows. So not just say, I don't think 10% is enough. Right?
I'm just wondering if a deadline would be helpful.
Yes, I think it would.
As long as it's out far enough.
What makes sense? 2 weeks?
2 weeks, end of July? Is that enough? That's not, a little less than 2 weeks.
Today's 21.
For me, it'll have to be the end of July because then I'm on vacation, so it's not quite 2 weeks. We could do a little longer. If you
Well,
want.
since
If we're not coming
Third-
back till September. Are we on vacation?
No, we're
most
middle of August. We have
August 18th, there is a work session. But you have, we're obviously back here next Monday, and then the following 2 Mondays off of that, you have off. And so what we could do is give you that time on August 4th and have comments due back,
By the 4th?
yeah, or
Okay.
on the 5th,
Okay.
on August 5th, let's say.
Okay. So comments by August 5th. That'll give Jennifer and Robin a chance to process some of that for when we come back together. Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, just a quickie. I think I can look up for Jeff's email, but I don't have Kristen's. And I know at one time a page was sent out with all the commissioners' emails and stuff.
Foster.
If that could be
That'd be
updated,
good.
that would really help.
We will send that out.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Duncan.
Some of these we just had questions. I guess we could ask that maybe they just, respond to us via email, or would it be better to respond to us
August 5 meeting.
Whenever that meeting comes up in September. I mean, sometimes I just have questions about something meaning something, and it might help me work through other comments. So I wouldn't mind getting the answers.
I don't know that there's a problem getting an answer.
No, I'd say,
As long as from
Bernie,
staff.
short
as long as
clarifications,
staff.
no problem.
Okay, great.
I think the only time it gets to be a problem is if we start deliberating on
Convincing
something.
you I'm right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. With that, we're adjourned.
Well, so when we come back, you'll be gone?
No.
I mean, as...
No.